Some opposition parties have slammed the extension that's been granted to the independent panel that's probing the Phala Phala farm robbery. The three-member team is now expected to deliver its final report on this matter come the 30th of this month, or round about that time. They're tasked, of course, with investigating whether there are any grounds to impeach President Cyril Ramaphosa for his role in the 2020 robbery at his Limpopo farm. For more reaction to this, let's bring in now constitutional law expert, Professor Richard Calland, joining us via our Zoom link this morning. Prof, great to see you as always. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us. You've been quoted already as saying that you're not surprised that this panel has asked for an extension. Tell us why.
Well, I think they were given, good morning, Ayanda. I think they were given a very tricky task because this is the first time that such a process has unfolded. There were some delays in terms of establishing the panel in the first place. And of course, they are having to scrape up evidence that may not be easily available. What the task that they face is quite a substantial one. It really is a sort of first hurdle to the impeachment process. And they have to determine whether there is sufficient evidence, that's what the rules say, sufficient evidence for the impeachment process to proceed in Parliament. And in doing that, they're limited in the evidence they can look at, but they have to look at any evidence or submissions received from members of Parliament, and having received such submissions or evidence, they have to give the President a chance to respond, and then they reach some kind of conclusion. I imagine there would have been some delays in that process. I imagine that the task itself is tricky in any case. So that's why I'm not surprised that there's been a delay here. And I can well understand why some parties would want to complain about that. But it's, I think, important that this process should be conducted very carefully and very fairly. And I think we should trust former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo to do the right thing and to handle that process appropriately.
Yeah. So much being said around this panel, of course, being as independent as possible. The optics around this are going to be incredibly important. There's already people pointing to the timing of this extension, right? So if our maths is anything to go by, the report should be ready by the end of this month, but it comes a day shy before Parliament is meant to rise for the year, which means this issue really, effectively, is deferred until next year, allowing the President to go ahead with this conference later on this year. That might have not been the intention for the panel. We actually don't know, but they're going to have to manage, at the very least, the perception around this quite carefully.
I don't think former Chief Justice Ngcobo will be too concerned about public perceptions. He's not a man who dabbles in politics. He won't be looking over his shoulder, concerned about the political aspect of this. He'll be concerned about doing the process correctly in the right way to ensure that it's fair and reasonable and that will stand up to scrutiny. And frankly, whether it was published yesterday on time or whether it was in 2 weeks' time at the end of November, it would make no real difference to what Parliament can do. Because the next phase, let's say the panel says there is sufficient evidence to proceed, the next stage is that Parliament has to conduct its own inquiry into whether the President has been culpable of misconduct or is otherwise unfit for office. And that would take any number of weeks or months to unfold. It wouldn't happen before the ANC's conference at the end of December.
My understanding is that, in fact, Section 89 processes don't allow the Speaker to grant any kind of extension, so she's invoked a different rule, Rule 6, we're told, and you'll tell us a bit more about that, which deals more specifically with unforeseen circumstances. Is it the right way to go about this? Did she do the right thing?
Well, this is the first time this process has unfolded, and when any new set of rules is road tested for the first time, I think you're inevitably going to find that there may be some glitches, there may be some unforeseen elements. What was the Speaker to do if former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo said to her, look, we just need a bit more time. We can't issue a report at this point because we're still going through the process of receiving evidence or hearing back from the President. We don't know more than that, of course, and it might have been perhaps useful if the Speaker had said a little bit more yesterday about the reasons, the specific reasons for the delay. That might have assuaged some of the concerns about the reasons, the real reasons for this.
There are already great anticipation, or there is great anticipation for the final report itself. In fact, the ATM, which initially brought that motion, has already come out to say that, if this panel does not find any or does not give any adverse finding against the president, they're already prepared to take it on judicial review. Of course, that's not how things work. You know, you don't wait for a process and only give it your legitimacy if it concurs with what you want, for lack of a better term. But there's going to also need to be a lot of work put into ensuring that the integrity of this process is seen through right till the end, given the commentary around it already.
Well, that's right, and you're absolutely right to pick up on the ATM's approach to this. It's quite revealing. It suggests that they think there is only one possible outcome, and unless they are privy to such decisive evidence that none of us are privy to, they really can't offer that kind of preliminary verdict. They can't prejudge the issue, unless, in fact, their sole intention, which I think it is to harm the president come what may. And, of course, this process has already attracted scrutiny. As you know, I was originally appointed to this panel, and I stepped aside from it because of controversy over that appointment. And the reason I did so was because, in the end, the integrity of the process and the reasonable apprehension of its integrity is really critical. An impeachment of any president, regardless of the motive of the people bringing the impeachment process, has to be sacrosanct. It has to be defendable. It has to be one that the public can trust.
Sure. And because of that, because of the stakes, we're going to have to be very thorough in our interpretation of how this process actually unfolds and how we make sense of its findings. We've been saying so far that there needs to be sufficient evidence for some kind of an impeachment process. But do we know what that means? I mean, is there a way to measure that? Because I imagine that could be a bone of contention even on the other side of this panel's work.
Yes, legally it's interesting because most people have been getting it wrong and saying that the test is a prima facie ground. In other words, is there enough evidence just to initiate, justify the launch of the proceedings? Sufficient evidence of one of the grounds of impeachment is what the actual rules say, and that seems to me to be a slightly higher test. It means that the court has got to basically say there is a significant case to answer. I'm adding another word there, significant. Let's move that. Let's focus on sufficient evidence. So one of the jobs this panel has got to undertake is to define their terms. They've got to say what they think that means. And then, of course, they've got to apply that test to the facts that have presented themselves to them, the evidence they have, and reach an outcome.
Sure. You've already answered my next question in part before we let you go. I mean, we know that hopefully the panel is going to now give its report at the end of the month. And then you've already mentioned that Parliament will also have to do some of its work. What happens thereafter?
Well, if the panel says there's not sufficient evidence, that's the end of the matter, subject to some kind of judicial review. Beyond that, if they say there is sufficient evidence, then we go to stage 2 of a 3-stage process, and Parliament would have to set up a special committee to investigate the grounds. Remember that with this Section 89 impeachment process, it's not a vote of no confidence. It's not a purely political choice. The Parliament itself has to look at the 3 grounds in the Constitution under Section 89 for removing a sitting president. One is basically ill health. That doesn't apply here. The others 2 relate to different forms of kind of unlawful behaviour or misconduct. And that's really the focus in this case. Parliament would have to make its own, to set in motion its own investigation, reach its own credible findings, and if then there is a majority in that committee in favour, only then does it go to the full National Assembly for a final vote on the President's impeachment. Yeah,
so potentially there's still a long way to go before we reach any kind of conclusion. Richard Calland, great to speak to you as always. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Professor Calland is a constitutional law expert.